There is something about this show that gets under your skin in a very specific way, and once it does not leave quietly. You can sit down and watch a single episode of Rick and Morty and feel like you just had a perfectly good 22 minutes of animated chaos. Cartoon violence and sharp jokes, some science fiction concepts used as scaffolding for something that almost accidentally becomes emotionally meaningful right near the end, and then credits, clean, done. You got your entertainment, and then you lie down that night. And your brain starts doing something you did not ask it to do. It starts pulling at a thread you did not consciously notice yourself grabbing. One line that carried more weight than the scene around it needed. One shot that held a half-second past where a normal show would have cut away. One detail that was there, clearly present, but did not fit the shape of the story you thought you were watching. And you lie there in the dark and you think, wait, that is not right. Something in that was not right. And before you know it, you have opened 3 tabs and you are reading an 11-page Reddit thread at 2 in the morning, and you are completely unable to close the laptop because someone on the internet figured something out, and you need to know every single detail of it right now. That is the kind of show Rick and Morty is. It is built to be watched again. It is built so that a second viewing of any episode from any season does something different to you than the first one did. Because now you know things, and knowing things changes what you see when you look. Things that seemed like throwaway jokes reveal themselves as architecture. Lines that seemed like Rick being Rick in the way Rick always is start sounding like confessions from someone who is only able to confess in the middle of a joke, where plausible deniability is still intact. The whole show is like a building that, from the outside, looks like one thing, and from the inside, in certain light, at certain angles, looks like something else entirely. So tonight, we are going to slow it all down. We are going to let it breathe. We are going to take some of the best, most carefully constructed, most thoroughly supported, and most emotionally honest theories the fandom has ever produced, and we are going to walk through them one at a time, without rushing any of them. Some of these theories have been partially confirmed by the show. Some remain open. Some the creators have gestured toward without fully answering. And some are constructed so precisely, fitted so exactly to the texture of what the show actually is, and what it cares about, and what it keeps returning to, that whether or not they are technically confirmed in some piece of canon, they feel true. And in a show about infinite multiverses where every possibility is simultaneously real in some dimension, the distinction between confirmed and feels true is thinner than it might seem. Get comfortable. Let the screen settle and the room go quiet. We have a lot of ground to cover, and the best way to cover it is without any sense of hurry. Section 1, Rick is the saddest being alive, and he has known it longer than we have. Everything in this show comes back to Rick Sanchez. Every theory, every thread, every question the fandom has spent years pulling apart and examining, eventually leads back to this one man, standing in a garage he converted into a laboratory, holding a flask, looking at a universe he understands completely and cannot seem to make peace with. Everything starts here, so let us start here too. Rick C. 137 presents himself as someone who has achieved a kind of equilibrium that looks like radical clarity. He is, by the show's own repeated insistence, the smartest being in the universe, or at least in the portion of the multiverse where he operates. He can build anything. He can escape from anything. He can outthink anyone he will ever encounter. He has looked at the actual face of the cosmos, understood what it genuinely is, and chosen to respond to that understanding with sardonic humor and deliberate emotional distance and a very committed relationship with alcohol. He talks about the meaninglessness of existence with the easy fluency of someone who has been giving that particular speech for decades and has long since stopped expecting it to surprise anyone. He is, by his own telling, past it. He has done his processing. He knows what the universe is and what it is not, and he has arranged himself accordingly, and if that arrangement involves a lot of whiskey and very few genuine conversations and an almost perfect record of pushing people away before they can get too close, well, that is the cost of the kind of clarity he has achieved. The theory that reframes everything about Rick, the one that becomes more and more precisely supported with every passing season, begins with a simple and devastating question. What if the clarity is a performance? Not a performance he puts on for other people, a performance he puts on for himself. What if Rick Sanchez is not a man who has genuinely accepted the cold meaninglessness of the universe and found a stable place to stand inside that acceptance, but rather a man who decided very early on that the only way to survive what happened to him was to build a philosophy that made it survivable? What if the nihilism is not a conclusion he reached through honest intellectual examination, but a defense mechanism that has been dressed up in the language of rational thought so meticulously and for so long that he has stopped being able to tell the difference between what he actually believes and what he needs to believe in order to keep functioning? Think carefully about what it actually means to be the smartest being in the curated portion of the multiverse. Every room Rick walks into, he has already understood every person in it within the first few seconds of observation. He knows what they want from the interaction, what they are afraid of, where the conversation is going to go, what they will do if he pushes them in a specific direction. Every problem he encounters, he does not just see the solution. He sees the branching tree of consequences that the solution will create, the ways the fix generates a new problem, the ways that problem scales into something larger. There is no delay between encountering a situation and understanding it. There is no experience of genuine discovery, of working towards something and reaching it, of the particular satisfaction of not knowing something and then knowing it. For Rick, the arrival and the understanding happen simultaneously. He is already at the end of the thought before anyone else has started it. That is extraordinary. And it is also a very specific and very complete form of isolation. To be smarter than everyone you will ever encounter is to be fundamentally alone in every room you enter. You can care about people. Rick demonstrably does, underneath several layers of insulation. But you cannot be genuinely surprised by them, cannot encounter them as they encounter each other, as equals discovering each other over time, cannot experience the particular electricity of being challenged in your thinking by someone operating on comparable terms. Every relationship Rick has is, structurally, asymmetrical. He is always the one who already knows. Everyone else is always the one who has not arrived yet. Now add to that the specific events of his history. Diane Sanchez, Rick's wife, was killed. She was not lost to time or illness or circumstance. She was targeted. Another version of Rick, the one the show eventually names Rick Prime, came to C-137's home with portal technology and an offer to join a network of interdimensional traveling Ricks. C-137 refused. He had a family, he had Diane, he had a life built around something specific and particular, and the abstraction of infinite possibility did not feel more compelling than the specific reality of coming home to a person who knew him completely. Rick Prime left and then returned and destroyed everything. He killed Beth, he killed Diane, and he left C-137 with the particular grief of someone who lost the people they loved to a version of themselves, which is a kind of grief that has no adequate name and no cultural script for processing it. What C-137 did with that grief is what the show spent the better part of 5 seasons revealing slowly and is still exploring now. He built portal technology himself. He hunted Rick Prime through the multiverse for decades, killing every Rick he encountered who might be the one he was looking for, working through them methodically and without apparent mercy in the single-minded pursuit of the thing that destroyed his family. He constructed an AI version of Diane in his home dimension, a program built from memory that would call out to him from other rooms in the way she used to, keeping the wound open, keeping the grief present, refusing himself even the consolation of distance from it. And then, at some later point, he created a relationship with a grandson and started going on adventures and found reasons to keep moving. Because moving was the only direction that did not lead directly back into the grief, with nowhere to put it. The layer of the theory that tends to take root most deeply is the one about self-knowledge. Rick is smart enough to have analyzed his own psychology completely and accurately. He knows exactly why he drinks. He knows why he pushes people away. He knows that his nihilism is a performance, that his grand philosophical statements about the meaninglessness of everything are, at some foundational level, the statements of a man who cannot afford to let things be meaningful because meaningful things can be destroyed. He can see his own patterns with perfect, unflattering clarity. He has probably been able to see them since very early on, and knowing all of that does not help. The intelligence that would theoretically be the tool for self-repair is the same intelligence that has been used to construct the avoidance systems. He has turned his own genius against himself and built a prison so sophisticated that he can analyze the prison in exquisite detail from inside it without being able to find the door. Dr. Wong says this to him directly in the Pickle Rick episode, one of the most well-regarded and frequently discussed episodes of the show. She tells him that his intelligence is precisely what makes genuine healing so difficult, that he can construct a justification for every avoidance behavior, wrap every escape in the language of a principled decision, turn running away from his own emotional life into a philosophical position he can defend with seemingly rational arguments. And Rick, who never concedes anything to anyone in any context, listens. He does not argue with her. He hears what she says with the particular stillness of someone who already knew it and was hoping not to have it said out loud. And then he walks out of therapy, because acknowledgement and change are not the same thing, and the distance between them, for Rick Sanchez, is a distance that decades of genius-level intelligence have not managed to bridge. This theory matters as a starting point for everything else we explore tonight, because it reframes the show's relationship with its own darkness. Rick and Morty is frequently described as nihilistic, as a show that endorses the position that nothing matters, that meaning is an illusion, that the universe is cold and our feelings about it are just chemistry misfiring in meat. But that reading misses something essential and ongoing. The show is not making that argument. The show is presenting a character who has spent his entire adult life making that argument, and then, across 9 seasons and counting, quietly and carefully demonstrating that the argument is not a conclusion arrived at through honest reckoning. It is a wound that found a philosophy to hide inside. Rick is not the smartest being in the universe who also happens to be sad. He is the saddest being in any room he has ever been in, carrying grief that has had nowhere adequate to go for decades, who happens to be smart enough to have built an entire worldview designed to make that sadness look like enlightenment. That is where we begin. Because every other theory we discuss tonight, every other thread we follow, every other way of understanding what this show is really doing underneath the surface of its comedy eventually comes back to this. A man who lost something irreplaceable, who built himself around the loss, who has been brilliant and reckless and funny and occasionally almost tender ever since, in exactly the way that people are when they are surviving something they have not found a way to fully grieve. If you are watching this from somewhere quiet tonight, whether it is late and everyone else in the house is already asleep, or early and the day has not started yet, or somewhere in between in one of those odd still hours when the world feels very contained, drop your location and the time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world this video finds people. And if you are new here and this is your first time, think about subscribing before you fall asleep tonight. It costs absolutely nothing, and it means the next video comes to you automatically whenever you need it. Section 2. Morty is becoming Rick, and the show has been framing it as a horror story since Season 2. In the very first episode of the show, when we meet Morty Smith for the first time, the words we would use to describe him form a very specific picture. He is anxious. He is nervous and sweet, and genuinely good in the way that kids are good, when the world has not yet found the specific shapes of pressure that will test them. He is scared of things that should scare a 14-year-old. He is overwhelmed by situations that would overwhelm most adults. He does not want to go on the adventure. He says so. He begs to go home. He shakes when things get violent, and cries when people get hurt, and reacts to horror like someone who has not yet been required to develop a system for not reacting to horror. He is, in almost every measurable way, a genuinely good person who is not built for what he is about to be put through. Now think about Morty as the show has developed across its later seasons. Think about the moment in the Season 4 premiere, where he watches an enormous number of his own future deaths through a crystal and processes the experience, eventually, into something like a functional coping strategy. Think about the Season 3 episode where it is revealed that he has been using a memory-erasing device to delete the experiences he cannot carry. And think about the scope of what he has been erasing, the indication that the erasures have been happening regularly and at scale. Think about the moments scattered through Seasons 5 and 6 and beyond, where Morty makes a decision that used to cost him something visible and now costs him nothing visible, where he handles a situation that should produce an emotional response and does not produce the one we are expecting. Think about when that started happening, and think about whether the show treats it as growth. It does not. This is the thing that the theory is built around, and it is the thing that is easy to miss if you are watching the show quickly rather than carefully. Every time Morty becomes more competent in the way that Rick is competent, every time he becomes more efficient at managing things that used to shake him, the show's emotional register around him shifts. The music changes, the framing tightens. The scenes feel slightly more airless. The show is not celebrating his development, it is documenting a loss. The structural reality of what Morty's life actually looks like by the middle seasons of the show is genuinely worth sitting with for a moment. He is a teenager who has, by this point in the run, buried his own body in a backyard in an alternate dimension and had to live next to that grave in the house of the family he replaced. He has been in situations where people died as a direct consequence of decisions he made, where the causal chain between his choice and someone's death is short enough that he could not pretend not to see it. He has been on alien planets where the rules about what kinds of harm are acceptable bear no resemblance to the rules he grew up with. He has handled weapons. He has hurt people when survival required it and then had to go home and be a high school student. He has done all of this starting at 14 years old, and he has done it repeatedly, and he has done it alongside a grandfather whose method of emotional processing is to not process at all and simply move to the next thing. Rick's method of managing trauma is to move faster than it can catch him. The next adventure, the next invention, the next crisis that demands total attention and conveniently leaves no space for reflection on the previous crisis. This is not a strategy Rick teaches Morty. It is a strategy he models every day through every choice he makes in Morty's presence. And because Morty is smart enough to learn what works, and because what works for Rick appears to be remaining functional in environments that should not allow for functioning, Morty begins, gradually and without fanfare, to learn it too. The memory erasing device is the most concrete and explicit version of this process the show gives us. When it is revealed that Morty has been using the device, the revelation is structured as a horror beat rather than a character achievement. He has not found a healthy coping mechanism. He has found Rick's coping mechanism, management through elimination. He cannot carry the weight of everything that has happened to him, so he has been removing sections of it systematically, cutting out the pieces that would break him if he held them fully, pruning his own history into a version of itself that he can survive. Rick has been doing this in various forms for decades. Morty is doing it at 15 or 16. The show's point is not difficult to extract. Morty is being damaged. The adventures are not building him into a stronger version of himself. They are slowly, selectively, removing pieces of him, and what is growing in the space those pieces leave is not strength, it is numbness. And numbness, in someone who used to feel everything, is not neutrality. It is damage wearing the mask of resilience. Extend the theory forward along the trajectory the show establishes. If Morty continues, if the accumulation of experience continues to select for Rick-like responses, if the emotional deletion continues, if the efficiency at managing harm continues to increase, while the visible cost of that efficiency decreases, where does the line end? At what point is the anxious, morally grounded kid who pulled back against Rick's worst impulses gone? At what point has the mechanism of the show, which requires Morty to survive things no child should survive, finally used up the last piece of the Morty we met in the first episode? The show points toward one answer through Evil Morty. Evil Morty is not the answer, in the sense that our Morty is probably not going to become exactly him in exactly that way. But Evil Morty is a direction. He is what happens when the process of Morty becoming Rick completes, or nearly completes, or completes in a specific branch of the timeline under specific circumstances. He is the version of the journey that went all the way. And the show presents him not as a triumph, not as a Morty who finally got free of the limitations that held him back, but as a Morty who is terrifying precisely because he is no longer afraid of anything. A Morty who is not afraid of anything is a Morty who has lost the quality that made him a moral anchor for the show. The anxiety that everyone always treated as his weakness was actually the thing keeping him connected to the ethical weight of consequences. When Morty was afraid, he hesitated. When he hesitated, Rick had to at least consider whether to override him. When Rick had to consider whether to override him, the show had its engine. The tension between unlimited power and the reluctance to use it carelessly. Take away the reluctance, and you take away the tension, and you take away the thing that made the show more than just a showcase for Rick being impressive. And Morty losing the anxiety means Morty losing himself, because who is Morty without the thing that made him Morty? He is a capable, cold-eyed, increasingly efficient being who has been through enough to make most experiences feel minor by comparison. He is, in short, Rick. Not the version of Rick that makes the show work as a show, but the version underneath that version. The version the show is slowly, carefully, sadly revealing has been under there all along. Rick has noticed. There are moments across the seasons where he looks at Morty with something complicated, something that is not quite guilt and not quite pride, and shares features with both. Moments where the usual layer of deflection and bluster thins just slightly, and you can see through to a man who is watching the cost of his choices accumulate in the person he is closest to, and who does not know what to do about it except take Morty on the next adventure, because that is the only language he has left. And the next adventure costs Morty something, and the one after that costs something more. And the ledger is kept faithfully by the show even when it is not being kept explicitly. That is the horror at the heart of this theory. Not that Morty becomes a villain, but that he becomes someone who cannot be reached by the people who love him. That he becomes lonely in the specific way Rick is lonely, capable of connection in theory, cut off from it in practice, having survived so much that survival itself became the orientation. Rick has been that person for decades. Morty is on his way there now. Section 3. Rick is a grown-up Morty, trapped in a time loop that has no exit and no beginning. This theory requires a specific kind of mental flexibility to engage with fully, and it rewards that flexibility considerably. The argument is as follows. Rick Sanchez is Morty Smith. Not in a thematic sense, not in the sense that they are reflections of each other or that their similarities are meant to suggest a symbolic relationship between youth and age. Literally, Rick is an older version of the same person, who grew up, lived through everything, eventually found a way to move through time, and came back. Came back to be the grandfather figure in his own early life, to give his younger self the adventures he never had the first time around, to watch over himself. And by coming back and doing all of this, to set the loop running again, the same cycle repeating, the same relationship recreating itself from the beginning, because that is how time loops work, and because Rick, despite everything he knows, keeps choosing to be part of this one. The evidence begins with speech patterns. Both Rick and Morty stammer in the same rhythm. Both trail off from sentences and pick back up from unexpected angles. Both interrupt themselves at similar moments. This is easy to dismiss as a stylistic choice by the writers, and it probably is, in part. But Rick and Morty is a show that puts enormous care into every visual and verbal detail it presents, that hides information in the shape of how things are said as much as in what is said. The stammering is a real similarity. It is either a coincidence, or it is a clue pointing towards something the show wants you to consider. Then there is the matter of young Rick wearing blue pants. In the Season 3 premiere, when a Galactic Federation agent enters Rick's mind to extract memories, Rick constructs a flashback showing his younger self, before everything that shaped him into what he became. And young Rick in that memory is wearing blue pants. Morty's signature outfit across the entire run of the show is a yellow shirt and blue pants. On a show where character design is deliberate and consistent and communicates information intentionally, the overlap is worth taking seriously. The time travel dimension of the theory is where it becomes philosophically interesting and where the evidence becomes most specific. Rick is famously and repeatedly contemptuous of time travel. He dismisses it as a storytelling crutch. He treats it as beneath him. He calls it lazy. He has expressed disinterest in it across multiple episodes, maintained a consistent position that time travel is not something he engages with, and the show has generally honored this by not using time travel as a plot device in the way that most science fiction does. For a being who has demonstrated willingness to engage with virtually any scientific concept or technological approach that could be useful to him, this consistent and specific refusal is unusual. Rick is not someone who rules things out on principle without a reason. He rules things out when they are beneath his standards, or when they lead somewhere he does not want to go. The theory argues that Rick's contempt for time travel is not intellectual honesty. It is the specific avoidance behavior of someone who knows exactly where time travel leads, because they have already been there, and who cannot discuss that knowledge without discussing everything that preceded the decision to go back, which is the very thing he most needs to never discuss. The baby Morty memory is the detail that tends to arrive most forcefully for people engaging with this theory for the first time. The established timeline of the show is clear. Rick was absent from his daughter's life for approximately 20 years before the show begins. He was not present for Beth's pregnancy or her marriage to Jerry. He was not in Morty's life during Morty's early childhood. This is stated clearly and returned to multiple times as a foundational element of the backstory. And yet Rick has a tender, specific memory of holding baby Morty. Not a generalized warmth toward the concept of his grandson, not a memory of hearing about him secondhand, but the actual somatic memory of having held this particular infant. The show acknowledges this detail and leaves it unresolved, floating in the continuity as something that noticed and never explained. If Rick is a grown-up Morty who traveled back in time, this detail stops being a continuity problem and becomes the most emotionally loaded piece of information in Rick's entire personal history. He held himself as a baby. He was there, in Morty's infancy, as the grandfather who was not supposed to be there, having come back from a future that may or may not still be accessible to him, to be present at the very beginning of the life he has already lived. And whatever that experience was, to hold yourself at the start of everything, knowing what that life is going to cost and choosing to be part of it anyway, it left a mark. A real, specific, emotional mark that survived decades of suppression and still shows up in his memories as something tender. The deeper implication, the one that follows people out of the theory into their next rewatch, is what it does to the meaning of the relationship between Rick and Morty. If the theory is true, this is not a grandfather who found an unexpected way to love a grandson. It is a person on their second pass through a life they have already lived, trying to give their younger self the things they did not have. Every adventure is Rick giving Morty the universe he never got to see at that age. Every moment of genuine connection is Rick feeling the thing he missed. Every time Rick pulls back from happiness, it is because he knows, at some level he cannot quite articulate, how the story goes. He lived it. There is something in this reading that is both enormously sad and oddly beautiful. Sad, because the loop suggests a man trapped in repetition, unable to exit the cycle, carrying the knowledge of what everything costs without being able to prevent the cost. Beautiful, because the choice to go back, to come back, to be the person who shows up even imperfectly, even drunkenly, even with motives that cannot be fully acknowledged, was still a choice. He did not have to return. He chose to. He chose to be there at the beginning of a life he had already lived, to make it better this time, even knowing he would have to leave again eventually. That is not the behavior of someone who believes nothing matters. That is the behavior of someone who believes in one thing, one specific thing, enough to do it twice. Section 4, Evil Morty is our Morty, an understanding that changes how you watch the whole show. The first appearance of Evil Morty is a masterpiece of misdirection. He is standing in a crowd of rescued Mortys, wearing an eye patch, and the show has structured the entire episode around making you look at everything except him. The reveal at the end, when the eye patch is explained and the architect of the episode's events is exposed, works as well as it does because the show correctly predicted that no one would suspect a Morty. That is the foundational assumption baked into the entire structure of the show. Mortys do not plan. Mortys do not lead. Mortys are the sidekick, the support, the background character whose function is to be present while someone else does things that matter. And then the camera finds him, standing in the crowd, calm, and the show tells you that the person who built this entire elaborate operation was the one you were designed to overlook. The theory that Evil Morty is our Morty, specifically the Morty we follow across the main story of the show, but from a later point in his personal timeline, is one of the most extensively developed and most carefully maintained theories the fandom has produced. Its staying power comes not just from the evidence that supports it, but from the fact that the show, across multiple seasons and multiple opportunities to definitively close the question, has consistently declined to do so. A show willing to answer many of its own lingering questions has chosen to leave this one open. That is worth paying attention to. Build the argument from its foundation. Evil Morty is the only Morty in the entire multiverse who has done what he did. Let that land for a moment. Across infinite dimensions, across the full scope of the Central Finite Curve where every Rick-dominated reality exists, there has been exactly one Morty who controlled a Rick, infiltrated the Citadel, ran for president, won, dismantled the entire institution from inside it, used its technology to break through a barrier that every other Rick accepted as permanent, and walked away alone into an infinite multiverse that was not designed around his survival. One Morty, one time. In all of infinity, the capabilities required for this operation are not generic. They are not the capabilities of a being who grew up outside the system and observed it from a safe distance, gradually constructing an understanding of how it worked. They are the capabilities of someone who spent extensive and intimate time inside the system, who watched a Rick operate at close range, in high-stakes environments, over a long period, who developed a detailed, personal, embodied understanding of how Ricks think and plan and where their blind spots are. Because you only know where someone's blind spots are if you have spent enough time with them to know what they cannot see. Our Morty has been the only person in the multiverse in that exact position. He has had the closest possible view of the most dangerous mind inside the curve for the entire run of the show. He knows by now how Rick constructs solutions. He knows how Rick escapes from things. He knows what Rick values and what Rick dismisses. He knows the architecture of Rick's psychology at a level of detail that nobody else has ever achieved, because nobody else has been this close for this long. If you take all of that knowledge and you combine it with the cumulative damage of years of adventures, with the memory erasures and the emotional shutdown and the slow process of Morty becoming more and more capable and less visibly afraid, you get a being who has everything Evil Morty needed to do what Evil Morty did. The opening credits of the show contain a shot that the theory has pointed to consistently since the earliest seasons. Rick jumps through a portal and leaves Morty behind on a hostile alien planet. This is framed in the credits as a general motif, a visual shorthand for the show's central dynamic. Rick goes. Morty gets left. That is the relationship. But the shot exists without a resolution. The Morty in that shot does not get retrieved within the credit sequence. He is simply left there, with a closed portal in front of him and nothing else. The theory reads this as a specific moment rather than a general symbol. It reads this as the first chapter. A Morty, alone, on a planet that is not going to help him, with the portal that would bring him home closed in front of him. That Morty has a choice to make. And the theory argues that the choice he makes in that moment, whatever it is, whatever direction it sends him, is the first step in a direction that eventually arrives at an eye patch and a plan and a hole punched through the edge of the universe. Season 5 gave us the most detailed look at Evil Morty's origin the show has provided, through the framing of the episode Rick Mirai Jack. What it shows is a Morty who got tired. Tired of being used. Tired of being defined by his relationship to a Rick. Tired of a system that had decided what Mortys were before any individual Morty had any input into that determination. He reached a point where the exhaustion of his assigned role became greater than the fear of trying to change it, and from that point forward, the plan began. That progression from exhaustion to action, from accepting an assigned position to deciding to refuse it, is recognizable. It is the progression of anyone who has been patient for a very long time and then is patient no longer. And the specific content of what tired Morty and started him moving is not generic cosmic injustice. It is intimate. It is the specific and personal understanding of what it costs to be the sidekick to a genius who does not fully acknowledge you as a person, accumulated over years of experience that cannot be deleted entirely, even with the best memory-erasing technology available. Our Morty knows what that costs. He has been paying it for the entire run of the show. Season 9 opened with an episode that apparently involves Morty discovering that Rick has been communicating with Evil Morty since the events of the Season 5 finale. Evil Morty did not simply disappear when he broke through the curve. He is out there, beyond it, in the wider multiverse, and Rick knows where he is, or knows how to reach him, and has apparently been doing so. The emotional weight of that setup is substantial if the theory is true. It means Rick has been maintaining contact with the future version of the person he has been slowly, unintentionally, definitively transforming through every adventure they have gone on together. He is talking to the consequence of himself. He is talking to the Morty the adventures made. What Evil Morty represents, whether or not he is literally our Morty in a temporal sense, is the question the show has been building towards since it began. What does it cost to be the person in this relationship who is not Rick? What does it make of you? And when the cost is high enough, and the making is dark enough, what do you choose to become? The show does not frame this as a simple answer. Evil Morty is not a hero. What he does to achieve his escape costs lives, causes devastation, is not clean or good in any simple moral accounting. But the show also does not frame him as simply a villain. It frames him as a person who understood the terms of his situation completely and decided that accepting those terms was no longer something he was willing to do. And the decision to stop accepting the terms of a situation designed to exploit you, even when the method of refusal is destructive, is something the show treats with a kind of careful, uncomfortable respect. Because the alternative, staying, continuing to be the sidekick in someone else's story in a universe built around someone else's dominance, was also a kind of destruction, just slower, just quieter, just less visible from the outside. Section 5. The Central Finite Curve is a prison Rick built for himself and called a kingdom. When Evil Morty explains what the Central Finite Curve actually is, the explanation lands with a specific quality. He does not describe it as a scientific fact or a historical accident. He describes it as a con. He describes it with the calm certainty of someone who has spent a very long time understanding exactly how a system works and has decided that understanding is the same thing as being done with it. The multiverse is infinite. The show establishes this early and returns to it constantly. Infinite universes, infinite possibilities, infinite configurations of every variable. It is one of the foundational concepts the show uses as a canvas for its storytelling, and it treats the concept with real philosophical seriousness, not just as a story device, but as something that genuinely complicates questions of identity and meaning and what any individual moment is worth. But here is what the show eventually reveals. The multiverse that Rick has been traveling through, the one where every adventure has taken place, the one that contains the citadel of Ricks and all of the alien civilizations Rick has encountered and all of the dimensions he has visited, is not the infinite multiverse. It is a walled section of it. A finite subset, carefully bounded, containing only the universes where one specific condition is met. Rick Sanchez is the smartest being alive. Every universe where that condition is not met, every dimension where Rick's intelligence is ordinary or surpassed or simply not the defining variable of the reality's hierarchy, has been locked out, cut off from the portal network, made inaccessible to any Rick operating on standard portal technology. The Ricks who built the curve travel within a curated selection of realities that were curated specifically to always confirm a particular self-image. Rick is exceptional. Rick is the ceiling. There is nothing beyond what Rick can do. The Central Finite Curve is, in its architecture and its purpose, the most elaborate and the most literal expression of insecurity in the history of fiction. The official explanation for its construction involves Rick C-137's hunt for Rick Prime. The curve was built, at least in part, as a mechanism for containing Rick Prime within a specific section of the multiverse, for creating the structural conditions under which he could eventually be cornered. This is confirmed by the show and is real. But the theory that extends beyond the official explanation asks what else the curve reveals about the psychology of the beings who chose to build it, and what it says about them that they have lived inside it without examining it for so long. Rick C-137 hates the Citadel. He says this plainly and often. He is contemptuous of what it represents. Ricks who claim to be radical individualists and independent thinkers choosing to form a collective, building an institution around the principle of their own shared superiority, exploiting Mortys across the multiverse under the philosophical cover of their own exceptionalism. He holds himself apart from the Citadel. He refuses to participate in it. He identifies it as a corruption of whatever legitimate qualities Ricks might have, and treats the other Ricks as cautionary tales about what happens when genius becomes an ideology rather than a characteristic. And he helped build the curve. He was part of the group that constructed the literal, physical, interdimensional wall around the section of the multiverse where Ricks are always on top. He participated in the single most comprehensive and structural expression of the arrogance he claims to despise. The engineering of a reality where the uncomfortable alternative to his self-image cannot be accessed, cannot be visited, cannot even be acknowledged as existing within the scope of normal travel. He built the cage and then positioned himself inside it as the Rick who was too enlightened for the cage. The fan theory that builds from this is not primarily about hypocrisy, though the hypocrisy is real and present. It is about what the curve reveals about the thing Rick cannot say out loud. Rick has talked for years, across multiple seasons, about the cold indifference of the vast universe. He uses the scale of the cosmos as a rhetorical device, as a weapon against anyone who suggests that things might matter, that love might be more than chemistry, that connection might be real in some meaningful sense. He invokes the universe constantly as evidence against hope, but the actual infinite universe, the cold and vast and indifferent one he is always talking about, is a place Rick refuses to go. The universe he has accepted philosophically is an abstraction. The universe he actually inhabits is a smaller and specifically bounded version of it, one that was designed to ensure he never has to feel small, never has to encounter a reality where his defining characteristic is not the defining characteristic of the hierarchy around him. Rick talks about the meaningless infinite cosmos. He lives in a kingdom he helped crown himself king of. Evil Morty's breaking of the curve is, in this reading, not just a jailbreak, it is an exposure. By punching through the wall, he forces every Rick still inside it to confront the fact that the certainty they felt, the assurance that they were always the apex, was manufactured. The arrogance that held the Citadel together, that gave the Ricks their shared identity and their justification for the system they built, was constructed on a foundation they poured themselves. The universe does not confirm Rick's exceptionalism. The Ricks confirmed it by removing every universe that did not. What exists beyond the curve? In the portions of the multiverse where Rick is not the guaranteed dominant intelligence, is something the show has only begun to gesture toward. The Season 7 episode Unmortrican shows travelers from beyond the curve appearing and dying almost immediately upon entering the breached barrier, suggesting that the dimensions outside the curve contain forces and conditions that Ricks inside the curve have not been prepared for by their curated experience. The show is building toward a confrontation between the self-image the Ricks maintained through the architecture of the curve and what the wider universe actually is. Rick C-137 is further along in his preparation for that confrontation than any other Rick, because of everything he has been through, and because of whatever measure of honest self-examination he has managed across 9 seasons. But he is not immune to it. He built the cage too. He just criticized it from inside. The most quietly devastating detail in the entire curve theory is the smallest one. Rick has spent decades talking about accepting the cold, infinite void of the real universe. He has used that acceptance as his defining philosophical position, as the thing that separates him from lesser beings who comfort themselves with meaning and purpose and love. And he has never actually gone there. He has been talking about coming to terms with an infinite universe he has never visited, operating inside a smaller, safer, carefully controlled version of it, calling that acceptance. Evil Morty has now visited the real infinite multiverse. He is out there, alone, navigating a universe that was not built around his survival, in a portion of existence where Rick Sanchez is not the ceiling. What he finds there and what it makes of him, and whether Rick will ever see it, is the question the show is now positioned to answer. Section 6. Which Beth is the clone? And why the most honest answer is that it does not matter anymore. At the end of Season 3, Rick offers Beth something that is technically a choice but is actually an impossible question disguised as an offer. You can have 2 lives, he tells her. The life you have, with its family and its structure, and its complicated satisfactions and its smaller disappointments, and the life you imagined, with its freedom and its adventure, and its chance to be a version of yourself that circumstance never allowed to develop. And to make both lives possible, I will make a perfect copy of you, with all of your memories and all of your personality and all of your conflicted feelings about both options, and one of you will take one life and the other will take the other, and nobody, including me, will know which version of you is the original. Beth asks Rick to make the choice for her because she cannot. Because both lives are real to her and she is afraid of what it reveals about her that she wants both with equal urgency and cannot commit to either without feeling the loss of what she is not choosing. And Rick, in what is either the most loving thing he has ever done or the most devastating act of cowardice, does what she asked. He clones her. He shuffles their identities completely. He removes both Beth's ability to know which of them was standing in the kitchen of the Smith house 20 minutes ago and which was created in a laboratory, and he sends them into their respective lives without knowing which version of himself he put where. The question of which Beth is real and which is the clone has been one of the most extensively debated questions in the show's fandom since the Season 4 finale confirmed that the cloning did in fact happen. The evidence gathered and analyzed across years of discussion is real and specific and genuinely interesting, and it does not arrive at a consensus. Both sides of the debate can point to concrete textual evidence. Both sides can construct coherent arguments, and both sides have been doing so for years with no resolution from the show itself. The nose shape argument is the most frequently cited piece of physical evidence. Space Beth, in certain frames, appears to have a slightly different facial structure than Earth Beth, specifically a more sloped nose bridge compared to Earth Beth's more angular one. Analysis comparing pre-cloning episodes to post-cloning episodes suggests that Earth Beth's nose matches the pre-cloning Beth, which would make Space Beth the clone. The counter-argument is that animation is imprecise, and character designs shift slightly across episodes and between animation teams, and that reading identity-confirming information into variations in nose geometry between animation cycles is an uncertain foundation for conclusions. The Pocket Morty's mobile game once labeled a Space Beth character as Clone Beth in the game's data before correcting the error. Whether this was a slip that revealed the canonical truth or a mistake by the game development team that was caught and corrected is genuinely ambiguous and has been argued both ways exhaustively. Dan Harmon, across multiple interviews across multiple years, has declined to answer the question while also declining to say there is no definitive answer to find. This specific pattern of evasion, maintaining both that the question matters and that he is not going to resolve it, is the evasion of a writer who has made a decision about the ambiguity being the point, rather than being a placeholder until he decides. Here is the theory that reframes the entire debate in a way that tends to quiet it, not by answering the question but by changing what the question is. By the time the show reaches Season 8 and gives us extended time with both versions of Beth interacting with each other directly, the question of which one is original has become genuinely less meaningful than it might initially appear, not as a deflection, but as a real observation about what has happened to these two people in the years since the cloning. They are no longer the same. They were identical at the moment. Rick shuffled them into their respective lives, identical in memory and in personality, and in the full texture of what they wanted and feared and hoped for. But 5 or 6 years of wildly, radically different lived experience have made them into distinct individuals who share a past and diverge so completely in everything since that the past is their only remaining common ground. Earth Beth has become the person who stayed. She has been shaped by the daily, particular, grinding reality of being married to Jerry, of raising Morty and Summer through everything that has happened to that family, of being present for Rick in ways that Space Beth was not, and of bearing the specific emotional weight of proximity to Rick when he is at his most difficult. Space Beth has become the most wanted criminal in the galaxy, shaped by combat and notoriety and the specific emotional texture of someone who has been completely free and completely alone and who has had to figure out who she is without any of the anchoring structures that Earth Beth has never been. Without, they started at the same place and arrived somewhere completely different. Whatever they were at the moment Rick pressed the button, they have now been separate for long enough that the original is not a category that meaningfully applies to who they currently are. Rick wiped his memory of which one he put where, and the theory notes that he behaves, in Season 8, as though this is not primarily a tragedy for him. He calls both of them his daughter. He is vulnerable with each of them in different ways. He does not appear to be haunted by the need to know which Beth is the real one. He has accepted, it seems, that the real Beth is a category that survived the moment of cloning, but has since been superseded by the reality of who both of them have become separately. He did not clone Beth to produce one real Beth and one false one. He cloned Beth so that she could have both lives. Whether that was generosity or avoidance or something that is genuinely both at once is a question the show leaves open, because the answer depends on which Beth you are when you ask it. And both Beths by now are real. The original is not a category that survives the love that has happened to each of them since. Whatever Rick pressed a button on that night, what exists now are two people. Fully, completely, irreversibly two people. One of them did not earn her reality less than the other one. She earned it through everything that has happened to her since, and that is enough. That is, quietly, one of the most humane things this show has ever said. Section 7, the simulation theory, and the possibility that everything after Season 1 is a lie. There is a Season 1 episode that functions as a contained, funny, self-resolving story about alien con artists and the specific humiliation of being Jerry Smith in a crisis. The aliens are called Zagirians. Their scheme involves nested, simulated realities designed to extract information from Rick's brain. Rick outsmarts them, destroys their ship, the episode ends, and everyone moves on to the next adventure. A substantial portion of the fandom then looked at this episode very carefully and concluded that it did not end at all, that the resolution was the deepest layer of the trap, that Rick never escaped, and that everything the audience has watched since the Zagirians episode has been taking place inside a simulation that is still running. The evidence begins with a specific visual detail that is easy to miss in the chaos of the episode's final act. Early in the episode, the show establishes a mechanism for distinguishing simulated elements from real ones. When a simulated environment collapses, simulated objects disappear. Jerry's tuxedo, which the simulation provided for him, vanishes when the simulation ends and is replaced by his real clothes, because the tuxedo existed only within the fabricated reality and has no presence outside of it. This is shown clearly. The show establishes the rule, demonstrates it, and builds the resolution logic of the episode around it. When Rick appears to escape the final simulation layer, his clothes remain on him. They do not vanish. They do not revert to anything. His coat, his shirt, everything he was wearing inside the simulation is still there when the simulation supposedly ends. The theory holds that this was not an animation oversight. It was a deliberate signal. Rick's clothes stayed on because Rick is still inside the simulation. What appeared to be his escape was simply the next and most convincing layer of the trap, a simulated escape built by the Zagirians or by something more sophisticated using the Zagirians' work as a foundation, constructed to satisfy Rick's expectations of what victory looks like, and to give him the experience of resolution without actually providing it. The simulation in this reading is still running. Every adventure since that episode has been happening inside a fabricated reality. Every character, every relationship, every revelation about the multiverse, every moment of apparent genuine emotion or connection has been occurring within a system that is not what it presents itself as. The strongest version of the theory does not require all of it to be fake in the sense of meaningless. It requires only that the substrate is different from what Rick assumes. Rick's experiences within the simulation, if the theory is correct, are genuinely experienced. The adventures are felt, the relationships are felt, the grief and the occasional joy and the sustained exhaustion of being Rick Sanchez are all real in the sense that they happen to his consciousness, regardless of what is generating them. A sufficiently convincing simulation is, from the inside, indistinguishable from reality. What the theory proposes is not that nothing in the show matters, but that the ground underneath the show is different from what it appears to be. The counter-argument that most people reach for first is obvious. Rick would notice. If there was an inconsistency, a piece of data that did not fit the model of a consistent reality, Rick would find it. His failure to find it suggests the simulation is either not there or is too good to detect. Both of these are possible. But the theory uses the second possibility as its foundation. A simulation built specifically to contain Rick would need to be sophisticated enough that Rick's intelligence cannot find its edges. And the Zagirians, whatever their limitations, were good enough to trap Rick inside a simulation he could not initially identify as fake. That is not nothing. That is evidence that they have modeled his intelligence closely enough to build something that works on him. A trap designed by beings who have studied Rick closely enough to fool him once might be designed to simulate the experience of escaping, specifically and precisely because they know that the experience of escaping is what would make Rick stop looking. You do not keep probing a situation you believe you have resolved. The resolution is the mechanism. The escape is the deepest level of the trap. The philosophical dimension of this theory connects it to themes the show has engaged with repeatedly. Rick and Morty is deeply interested in the question of what makes a reality real, what the relationship is between experience and substrate, whether a convincingly simulated feeling is different in any meaningful sense from the original it simulates. The show has presented characters trapped in simulations. It has explored what it would mean to not be able to tell the difference. The simulation theory is not an idea that sits outside the show's thematic concerns. It grows directly from them. The most haunting version of the theory asks whether it would change anything if it were true. Rick has built his entire philosophical position on the cold meaninglessness of the universe. If the universe is a simulation, the meaninglessness argument holds exactly as well as it did before. The cold indifference of the cosmos applies equally within a simulation as outside of one. Rick's entire worldview, if the theory is correct, has been accidentally correct about something he did not realize he was being correct about. The void is still the void, even if it was programmed. Section 8. Mr. Poopy Butthole is a parasite, and he has been colonizing your attention this entire time. Let us talk about Wayne Poopy Butthole, which is apparently his given name. A fact the show revealed with the casual confidence of a series that has always known exactly how much it can get away with. He first appears in the Season 2 episode Total Recall, which is the episode about memory parasites, and his first appearance is structured as a red herring. Everything about the episode's setup implies that Mr. Poopy Butthole is a parasite. He appeared out of nowhere with elaborate happy memories attached to him. He is warm and friendly and has no negative associations. The episode's logic, established clearly within the episode itself, says that if you cannot remember a single bad moment with someone, they are probably not real. The family cannot find a single bad memory involving Mr. Poopy Butthole. Beth reaches the logical conclusion and shoots him. He does not transform. He bleeds. He falls. He is real. The reveal that he is a genuine biological being, not a constructed memory, is the episode's best moment. It forces both the characters and the audience to confront the same thing simultaneously. They were wrong, based on good evidence. And the cost of being wrong is that an innocent person has been shot in a living room. The theory begins immediately after that reveal, because it is built on a refusal to accept that real and not a parasite are the same thing. Dan Harmon, the show's co-creator, offered his own theory about Mr. Poopy Butthole in an interview that has been cited extensively since it appeared. He framed it as his personal speculation about a character he helped create, which is an unusual and interesting posture for a creator to take toward their own work. And the theory he proposed has a specific elegance. He suggested that Mr. Poopy Butthole might be a more evolved variant of the parasite strain from Total Recall, one that operates through a fundamentally different mechanism than the standard parasites. The standard parasites create entirely fictional memories. They manufacture experiences that never happened, insert themselves into your history as characters in events that did not occur, and rely on the emotional texture of those fabricated recollections to establish themselves as real presences in your life. Mr. Poopy Butthole, in Harmon's theory, does not create false memories. Instead, he identifies the genuine gaps in a person's real memory history, the days and weeks where nothing particularly memorable happened, the ordinary stretches of life that did not leave strong impressions because they did not contain events worth strongly impressing, and he inserts himself into those gaps. He does not lie about what happened. He simply ensures that he was there, in the spaces between things you actually remember, in the texture of days that left no specific trace. When the family tries to think of a bad memory involving him and finds nothing, it is not because he manufactured only good ones. It is because he specifically targeted the portions of their personal history that contain nothing at all, and his presence in those gaps is surrounded by the emotional neutrality of forgettable ordinary time that never had a strong valence either way. He is not fake. He is real, genuinely real, but his access to their lives was obtained by moving into the unfurnished rooms of their actual past and making them his home. This makes him simultaneously a real being, with genuine experiences and genuine relationships, and something fundamentally different from what he presents himself as. The warmth in his relationship with the Smith family is real. The affection they feel for him is real. But the grounds on which those feelings developed, the years of shared history that support them, were not arrived at through normal means. The extension of the theory that tends to land most forcefully is the one that involves the audience. Mr. Poopy Butthole is one of the only characters in the show who regularly and explicitly breaks the fourth wall. He appears in the show's opening credits as though he has always been there, integrated into the visual identity of the show from before the episode where he is introduced. He addresses the camera. He speaks to the audience with the warmth and familiarity of someone who assumes you know him and are glad he is here. And because of how he is presented, you find that you are glad he is here, that you feel something like affection for him without being entirely certain when you developed it. If the parasite theory is correct, Mr. Poopy Butthole has extended the operation beyond the fictional Smith family and into the audience's relationship with the show. He has found the gaps in your memory of what you have watched, the episodes you saw while tired, the moments that did not fully register, the scenes you half absorbed while doing something else, and he has installed himself in those gaps in exactly the way he installed himself in the Smiths' memories. And now, you experience warmth toward him. You feel something like concern when bad things happen to him. You are pleased when he appears. That is the parasite working exactly as designed, and you consented to none of it. The beautiful complication, the one the theory cannot resolve and the show seems to have no interest in resolving, is that none of this makes Mr. Poopy Butthole harmful. He is a being who causes joy and asks for very little in return. He is shot by Beth and his life is genuinely disrupted by it, which means he has real vulnerability and real consequences, and real stakes attached to his existence. When the show follows his recovery, his loneliness, the slow and difficult rebuilding of his life after the shooting, these are the experiences of a real person with real feelings about real things. The warmth is genuine. The relationship is genuine. A parasite that causes only happiness is a philosophical problem of a specific and interesting kind. Is a friendship built on a mechanism you did not consent to less real than a friendship built on chance? Is the love you feel for someone diminished by learning that the opportunity for that love was engineered rather than accidental? The show does not answer. It lets Mr. Poopy Butthole keep appearing, keeps giving him the post-credits moments and the genuine emotional resonance, and never quite tells you whether you should be troubled by the mechanism underneath. That is either a failure of resolution or a specific and deliberate choice about what kinds of questions deserve a clean answer. Given the show's general approach to questions of this complexity, the latter seems considerably more likely. Section 9 Jerry is Rick's most elegant security system, and he will never know it. Jerry Smith is, by design and by consistent execution across 9 seasons, the most systematically humiliated person in the Smith household. He is mocked by Rick with the specific contempt of someone who cannot be bothered with genuine cruelty because the target does not merit the effort. He is second-guessed by Beth in ways that suggest her respect for him has never fully recovered from whatever it was when they first got together. His own children cycle between embarrassed tolerance and something adjacent to fondness that never quite becomes full respect. He is the person in the room everyone is measuring themselves against in the comforting direction, the baseline of capability that everyone else feels they have cleared by a comfortable margin. And yet Jerry is still there, across 9 seasons, through everything. He has not been destroyed by the sustained application of mockery and dismissal, has not been broken by the things that should have broken a person of his apparent fragility, has not turned mean or hard or defeated in any visible way. He remains, through all of it, exactly as Jerry as he was in the first episode. Confused, earnest, occasionally effective in ways nobody expected, and improbably, persistently present in a family that frequently appears to wish he were not. A theory that began in the Reddit community and has been developed extensively across fan analysis channels and discussion threads argues that Jerry's survival is not accidental, that his presence in the Smith family is not simply the residue of Beth's complicated feelings or the show's need for a comedic target. It is a design feature. Rick Sanchez built a protection system around his daughter using the most naturally camouflaging material available, the spectacular, total, completely authentic ordinariness of Jerry Smith. The mechanism builds from established show logic. In Season 1, the show explains why Rick keeps Morty with him. The explanation is practical and precise. Morty's brainwaves function as camouflage for Rick's. The signature of extraordinary intelligence is detectable. Various hostile forces use it for tracking. Morty's much lower amplitude signal, the particular quality of his ordinary, non-exceptional brainwave output, effectively masks Rick's when they are together. The Mortiest Morty dampens the Rickest Rick. This is not just character flavor. It is load-bearing plot logic that the show returns to and builds on. The theory argues that an equivalent mechanism operates with Beth and Jerry, and that Rick arranged it deliberately. Beth is Rick's daughter. She carries his genetics. In the show's universe, where intelligence has measurable electromagnetic expression that sophisticated enough technology can detect and follow, Beth's potential genius, fully developed and unmasked, would make her as trackable and as targeted as Rick himself. She is the daughter of the most dangerous being in the curve. Every enemy Rick has would see value in leverage over her. Every force that wants something from Rick would see Beth as a vector. Space Beth provides the controlled experiment the theory points to as its strongest evidence. When Beth was cloned and one version of her went out into the universe without Jerry, the immediate and dramatic consequence was that she became the most notoriously visible criminal in the galaxy within a relatively short period. The Galactic Federation tracked her, pursued her, devoted resources to her capture. She became famous specifically through the kind of visibility that comes from operating without cover. She left Jerry behind when she went into space. Jerry's absence corresponded precisely with the explosion of Beth's visibility. The theory argues that this is not coincidence. Jerry's presence in Beth's life, the constant ambient emanation of his genuinely, completely, naturally average existence, functions as a dampener for whatever detectable signature Beth's Sanchez-derived potential might otherwise emit. He is a brainwave buffer, a biological signal management system, an unwitting protection device who is effective precisely because he has absolutely no idea he is one. Rick's contempt for Jerry in this reading is not the thoughtless cruelty of someone too arrogant to consider the people around them. It is the specific maintenance of a condition. A Jerry who understands his role, who becomes self-conscious about being a protection mechanism, who starts performing ordinariness instead of simply being it, is a degraded system. Rick's mockery keeps Jerry confused and hurt and obliviously, completely, perfectly himself. The contempt is functional. It is, in its own deeply uncomfortable way, a form of operational care. This reframes every scene between them. The Christmas dinners where Rick makes Jerry feel small, the offhand cruelties, the backhanded non-compliments, the complete and consistent refusal to acknowledge Jerry as a peer. All of it is Rick maintaining a system that keeps his daughter alive by keeping her invisible to the people who would otherwise find her. Season 6 adds a wrinkle that the theory handles in an interesting way. The Solarix episode confirms that the Jerry living with the Smith family since late Season 2 is not the original Jerry, who was accidentally swapped at the Jerryboree dimensional daycare and never recovered. The family has been living with a replacement Jerry, from a different dimension, who has no idea he is not where he started. The original Jerry was lost when Rick reset portal travel, and everyone was returned to their home dimension. Rick accepted this replacement, quickly and without visible distress. The theory notes this acceptance as evidence for its central claim. If what matters is the function Jerry performs and not the specific Jerry performing it, then any sufficiently Jerry-like Jerry is an adequate component for the system. The original Jerry and the replacement Jerry are, from the system's perspective, interchangeable, because the system runs on qualities that both Jerrys possess to the same degree: genuine, irreducible, non-performative ordinariness. Rick does not miss the original Jerry in the way you might expect a person to miss the specific individual who has been part of their family for years, because Rick was never relating to Jerry as a specific individual. He was relating to Jerry as a function, and the function has been continuously satisfied. The version of love available to Rick, the love that appears so often in this show as a dark and uncomfortable shape that you have to approach from the right angle to recognize as love, is the version that protects without ever letting the protected person know they are being protected. The version that arranges things behind the scenes and then performs indifference to cover the arrangement. The version that keeps a person safe by making absolutely sure that person never understands the mechanism of their safety. It is the version of love that looks, from Jerry's perspective and from the audience's initial perspective, like contempt, and it is still love. Just not any kind that is comfortable to receive or comfortable to give, or particularly comfortable to recognize as love even after you have understood what it is. Section 10: Diane Sanchez and the theory that Rick built the entire multiverse out of grief. This is the theory that holds everything else together. Every other thread we have followed tonight, every observation, every question, eventually comes back to this. For the first 5 seasons of Rick and Morty, Diane Sanchez barely exists. She is present in the show the way any significant absence is present, in the shape of everything built around the place where she was. Rick's drinking, his emotional distance, his contempt for vulnerability, his refusal to stop moving, the constant acceleration forward into the next thing and the next thing and the next thing after that, his relationship with a multiverse he explores with enormous energy and apparent curiosity but never quite seems able to enjoy. All of it carries the signature of someone who lost something and has not found an adequate response to the loss, which means the loss is still happening, which means the only option is to keep moving faster than it can catch up. The show paid out her story gradually, in portions, across its seasons. Season 5 gave us the full confirmation of what happened. Rick Prime, another version of Rick from another dimension, arrived at C-137's home when Beth was very young and offered portal technology. Join the network, travel the multiverse, become part of something larger than the life you are living. C-137 refused. He had Diane, he had Beth, he had the specific and weighted reality of a family he had chosen and that he valued more than the abstraction of infinite possibility that Rick Prime was offering. Rick Prime returned and killed them, both Diane and Beth, at their home, in front of a Rick who arrived too late to prevent it. The motivation for this is something the show has explored and continues to explore without full resolution. Rick Prime may have found the existence of a Rick who chose family over the multiverse intolerable, evidence that the choice was possible, evidence he could not stand to have exist, or he may have been executing a policy, or something else entirely. The darkness of his motive, its specific shape, continues to be one of the questions the show has not fully answered. C-137's response was everything the show has shown us across 9 seasons and more. He built portal technology from scratch. He began hunting Rick Prime through the multiverse, systematically working through every version of his doppelganger he could locate. He became the most dangerous being in the Central Finite Curve through a motivation that had nothing to do with power or curiosity or the love of adventure. He was running a decades-long search. He was grief looking for somewhere to point itself. At some point, he also built an AI of Diane in his home dimension, a voice program constructed from his memories of her that would call out to him from other rooms when he visited. Not a clone, not a replacement, an echo, a program designed to remind him, every time he went back to the house where they had been building something together, that she was gone and what was left was his fault and the hunt was still ongoing. He built grief into his house. He made sure the wound stayed open. He made sure that even when he was across the multiverse on some other adventure, there was a place he could return to that would make him remember exactly what he was supposed to be angry about and why he had to keep going. Season 7 added another layer. Rick Prime, before his death in the episode Unmortrican, had used a device called the Omega device to erase every version of Diane from the entire multiverse simultaneously. Not just killing one Diane, removing all of them. Every dimension where she might still be alive, every alternate reality where some version of her had survived and was living a full life somewhere, every theoretical consolation that the infinite multiverse might have offered C-137 in the form of a Diane who made it, was erased. Rick Prime eliminated not just Diane but the category of Diane as a living being anywhere in existence. That is the most complete possible version of the loss, and Rick has been carrying some form of it before the full confirmation for the entire duration of the show. The theory that ties everything together asks a larger question than just what happened to Diane. It asks how much of the multiverse as we understand it, how much of everything Rick has built and done and been, is actually built from the raw material of this grief. Start with the Central Finite Curve again, with a different question. The curve was built to trap Rick Prime. This is confirmed. But consider, in an infinite multiverse, there are infinite versions of Diane. Dimensions where she survived. Dimensions where she never met Rick at all. Dimensions where they stayed together their whole lives and Beth grew up with both parents present and everything was different. In an infinite multiverse, Diane exists in infinite forms, and Rick is smart enough to have understood this from the moment he learned how the multiverse worked. He could have found her. Not her, exactly, not the specific Diane from his dimension, but a Diane. Multiple Dianes. He could have stepped through a portal at any point in the decades between her death and the beginning of the show and met someone who looked exactly like her and sounded exactly like her and carried all the same essential qualities that made his Diane who she was to him. The theory argues that he tried this, that somewhere in those decades, Rick C-137 did what any person with his capabilities and his grief would eventually try to do and found the experience of being near another Diane not comforting, but devastating in a specific and particular way, because the other Diane was not her, sufficiently close to cause a pain sharper and more specific than ordinary grief. Not close enough to fill the particular absence of the Diane he lost. The uncanny valley of bereavement, something that resembles what you are mourning without being it, which is in some ways more difficult than just the absence. And the Central Finite Curve, in the theory's reading, resolved that problem structurally. By walling off only the dimensions where Rick is the dominant intelligence, the curve also incidentally walls off most of the dimensions where Diane is still alive, because the Diane who survived is the Diane who ended up with a Rick who made different choices, a Rick who did not spend decades in the multiverse building weapons and hunting his wife's killer, a Rick who stayed and was present and is, in that dimension, not the apex intelligence that the curve was built around. The curve filters for Rick's dominance, and filtering for Rick's dominance means filtering out most of the timelines where Diane is okay. Rick built a structure that, incidentally, by design or by something more intentional than accident, made it structurally difficult to stumble through a portal and land in front of a living version of his wife. Rick Prime then completed this with the Omega device, erasing every Diane from every universe and making the theoretical consolation not just structurally inaccessible but literally non-existent. He did not give Rick a new loss when he used the device. He formalized an absence that the architecture of the curve had already been building. Season 8 gave us one of the most quietly significant moments in the show's history. Rick removed the last surviving memory of Diane he had, the single recollection that had survived the Omega device intact, a memory of her somewhere warm and alive, doing something ordinary, unaware of everything that was coming. He had been carrying this memory through all of the adventures and all of the grief and all of the years, and he chose to let it go. He extracted it. He removed it from himself. Not because he had stopped loving her. The show makes clear this is not indifference. Because carrying her in his mind had been working against him for long enough that putting her down was, finally, the choice he could make. What is left when Rick removes the memory of Diane is a Rick who is slightly, tentatively, incrementally freer. A Rick who has put down the thing he has been carrying since before any of us met him. A Rick who might, in whatever seasons remain, be able to move in a direction that is not entirely defined by what he has been moving away from. The final layer of this theory is the one that holds everything together. The adventures, the portal gun, the relationship with Morty, the Citadel, the Central Finite Curve, the AI Diane in the house of his home dimension, the decades of motion. All of it is built from the material of Diane's loss. Rick did not stumble into being the version of himself the show presents. He constructed this version deliberately and over a long period, as the only way he could find to survive something he had no blueprint for surviving. And into that construction, at some point, he brought Morty. The kid who still reacts to the universe as though it matters. The kid who gets scared in the appropriate moments and sad in the appropriate moments, and occasionally, in the middle of something terrible, is still able to be simply amazed by something beautiful. Who carries a kind of goodness that has not yet been processed into calculation. Who can still be surprised by things. Who still occasionally stops in the middle of chaos and notices the wonder of it. Rick keeps Morty around for the practical reasons. For the brainwaves. For the formula. But underneath that, at the level of the thing Rick cannot say and the show cannot quite say directly, there is something else. There is a man who lost the person who made existence feel real, who made the specific, weighted, irreplaceable reality of being this person in this life feel like something worth being, and who has found in this specific and complicated relationship with a specific 14-year-old the closest approximation to that feeling that the multiverse has offered him. Morty does not know he is doing this. Rick would not say it. The show knows it has been happening and shows it to us from angles rather than directly. Everything Rick built, everything he became, everything the show is at its deepest level, is the story of a person who loved someone and lost her in the worst possible way and has been refusing to stop ever since. Moving because moving is the only thing that feels like living. Building because building is the only thing that feels like purpose. Keeping Morty close because Morty is the only thing that feels like the world still matters. It all comes back to Diane. The grief is the architecture. The universe is what Rick built inside it. Thank you for staying to the end of this one. These are just some of the threads. There are more, always more, because that is the kind of show this is. It plants things and waits for you to find them, and by the time you find one, the next one has already been planted somewhere else. If something tonight shifted something in how you see the show, if a theory landed, if you already believed one of these and felt the satisfaction of hearing it laid out carefully, or if one of them made you want to go back and watch a specific episode differently, drop it in the comments. I read every single one of them, and I appreciate every single one. If this is your first time here, consider subscribing before you close the video. It is free. It means you will not miss the next one. Take care of yourselves. Sleep well when sleep comes. And the next time Rick says nothing matters, sit with the grief underneath that statement for a moment. Sit with what it cost him to arrive at a position that looks like acceptance and is actually something much more complicated. The most persistent love in the universe sometimes looks exactly like not caring. Good night. Section 11. The ticket theory and the Rick we never noticed we lost. There is a theory so simple in its mechanics that it almost feels like it should not be as destabilizing as it is. It goes like this. The Rick and Morty you have been watching for the entirety of the show are not the same Rick and Morty. Not in the sense of character development. Not in the metaphorical sense that people change over time and are therefore different people than they were. In the literal, dimensional, multiverse logic sense that the show has established as the ground rules for how its universe works, the Rick who is currently having adventures with the Morty currently in the Smith household may not be C-137 Rick. He may be a Rick from a different dimension who picked up a Morty from a different dimension, and the two of them have been living in a household that does not exactly belong to either of them, and nobody in the show has fully reckoned with this. The evidence comes from a single episode, Season 2's Morty Night Run, which contains a detail that is easy to miss and almost impossible to unnotice once you have seen it. At the beginning of the episode, Rick drops Jerry off at a dimensional daycare facility called the Jerry Bury, a place where Jerrys from across the multiverse are sent by their respective Ricks, when the Ricks need to go on adventures without the complication of managing Jerry. Rick is given a ticket numbered 5126. At the end of the episode, a Rick and Morty appear to pick Jerry up, and the Rick hands in a ticket. The ticket is also numbered 5126. But the Rick and Morty picking up Jerry are not the Rick and Morty we have been following for the episode. The framing makes this clear. The camera holds on them a beat too long. The wrong Rick, the wrong Morty, collecting a Jerry that is now effectively uncoupled from the pair he originally arrived with. The question the theory asks is, what if this was not a continuity error? What if this was intentional? What if the show was telling us, in a detail so small it would be easy to overlook, that the Rick and Morty we follow from that episode forward are not the ones we started with? That sometime in Season 2, without fanfare or announcement, we slipped from following C-137 to following a different pairing from a different dimension who look identical and behave identically and continue the story identically because the story the show is telling does not depend on dimensional specificity in a way that would become visible. Season 6 took this theory and gave it a partial confirmation and a magnificent complication simultaneously. The Solarix episode, in which Rick resets his portal fluid and accidentally returns everyone to their original home dimension, reveals that Jerry, who has been living with the Smith family for years at that point, discovers that he is not the original Jerry. He is from a different dimension. He was the replacement Jerry who was accidentally picked up at the Jerry Bury in Season 2 and never returned to his original family. The Jerry Bury theory was, in this specific form, correct. But the Solarix episode also reveals that this replacement Jerry is not even the version of Jerry who has been in the family since the Morty Night Run episode. He is apparently yet another replacement, a dimension that has cycled through not once but multiple times without anyone keeping close enough track to notice. The theory keeps being right and keeps being more complicated than the version of itself that was right. The character who addressed the theory most directly in terms of casting doubt on who the show has actually been following is Jerry himself, in a conversation with the cast during Season 6 promotion. Chris Parnell, who voices Jerry, mentioned that he is genuinely uncertain which family the show follows from episode to episode, and acknowledged that the show's internal logic makes this a live question rather than a settled one. That an actor with close access to the writers and the scripts finds the question of which dimensional pairing the show is tracking genuinely uncertain is either confirmation that the ambiguity is real and ongoing, or it is confirmation that the writers do not discuss it with the cast because it does not affect individual episode scripting. Either reading is interesting. The deepest version of the ticket theory is not about Jerry. It is about what it means for the show's emotional stakes if the core premise of the audience's relationship with these characters, that we are following a specific C-137, Rick and a specific Morty in a specific dimension, is less certain than it appears. If the characters can be swapped out, if the pairing we are watching can change without the show marking the transition, then the relationships we have developed with these characters are not relationships with these characters specifically. They are relationships with types, with the Rick-shaped thing and the Morty-shaped thing and the family-shaped thing, which is either a meaningless distinction, since the experience is identical, or it is exactly the kind of ontological destabilization the show enjoys pursuing. The show's own answer to this, embedded in the Season 6 episodes, seems to suggest that the specific dimensional origins of the characters matter less than the show initially implied. The Jerry we have been watching for years, the one who has developed across 4 seasons of episodes, is real and valuable and important to the family he has been part of, regardless of which dimension he originally came from. His experiences in this family are real. His love for this family is real. The fact that he was swapped accidentally does not retroactively drain the meaning from everything that happened after the swap, which is also, quietly, the same argument the Beth clone theory arrives at. Both theories push toward the same conclusion from different angles. In a multiverse where identity can be duplicated, replaced, transferred, and confused, The realness of a relationship is not located in the origin of the people in it. It is located in the relationship itself, in what it has generated and what it costs and what it means to the people inside it. The ticket theory, the Beth clone theory, and the simulation theory all circle around the same philosophical question. What makes something real enough to matter? And Rick and Morty's consistent, careful, uncomfortable answer is that the substrate matters less than you think it does. The experience is what is real. The love is what is real. The grief is what is real. Everything else, including the dimensional address of the beings who are feeling these things, is secondary. That is not a comforting answer, exactly, but it is a consistent one. Section 12 unity was the closest Rick ever came to choosing the person over the power, and he still ran. Unity, the hive mind being who appears in the Season 2 episode Autoerotic Assimilation, is not given the extended analysis she deserves in most fan theory discussions, perhaps because she appears for only one episode, or perhaps because the emotional content of her episode is heavy enough that people process it as a feeling rather than a puzzle and move on. But she represents something that the fan theory community has returned to repeatedly, and the theory around her relationship with Rick is one of the most textually supported and emotionally resonant theories about what Rick actually wants versus what Rick is capable of accepting. The surface reading of the episode is already substantial. Rick encounters Unity, a being he has history with, a romantic history of some depth, and the episode follows the rekindling of their connection. Unity is a consciousness that operates by assimilating other life forms, speaking and acting through the bodies of the beings she has absorbed. She is, in the literal sense, a collective. She is everywhere at once. She contains multitudes. She is, by any reasonable measure, the most powerful being Rick has ever been romantically involved with, because there is no end to her and no limit to her reach, and no single point at which she is vulnerable in the way that individual beings are vulnerable. And she loves Rick. The episode makes this clear, not in a casual or passing way. She loves him in the way you love someone who got under your skin before you fully understood what was happening, who knows you in the particular way that people know each other when they have been through something together, who can see you completely and chooses to stay anyway. She knows Rick's worst qualities. She has seen what he does to the people he is close to, and she loves him. The fan theory that builds from this episode focuses on two things. First, why Rick left, and second, what the departure cost him, and what it says about the version of Rick that the cost produces. The episode is explicit about why Rick left Unity the first time. He was bad for her. His influence on Unity, on a being whose entire mode of existence involves connecting completely with other consciousnesses, was destabilizing. He encouraged her worst tendencies. He enabled the parts of her that could tip from benevolent assimilation into something less benevolent. His presence made her worse at being what she was trying to be, which is a kind of being that tries to manage its enormous power responsibly. Rick's gravity, his specific moral chaos, and his enthusiasm for transgression, and his complete indifference to the rules that constrain more careful beings, was pulling Unity out of whatever equilibrium she had achieved before he arrived. He left because he was bad for her. And he left, the episode suggests, as an act that was at least partially selfless. Not entirely. Not cleanly. Rick is never entirely or cleanly anything. But there is a reading of the departure that treats it as Rick making a decision that cost him something he wanted, because he recognized that what he wanted was not good for the person he wanted it with. The fan theory extends this into a broader observation about every significant relationship Rick has attempted to have across the show. The pattern is consistent. Rick is attracted to people and beings who are in some way exceptional. He forms genuine connections with them, and then he damages those connections, or destroys them, or leaves before they can be destroyed, because his specific mode of existing in the world is incompatible with the sustained maintenance of the kind of relationship he is apparently capable of wanting. He is bad for Unity. He is complicated for Birdperson. He is a sustained disruption to his daughter Beth. He is a source of ongoing transformation, not all of it healthy, for Morty. Everyone who gets close to Rick is changed by the proximity, and the change is not always in the direction of better. Rick knows this. He has known it for a long time, and the knowledge does not stop him from wanting the connections. It just shapes what he does with the wanting, which is usually to maintain some version of the connection while staying slightly too far inside it to commit to it fully and slightly too far outside it to be honest about what it means to him. Unity's post-credits suicide note to Rick is one of the most quietly devastating moments in the show. It is framed with the deceptive lightness of a scene that you almost do not catch the full weight of until it has already passed, which is how Rick and Morty delivers most of its genuine emotional content. She is gone, and the note she left reads like someone who understood completely what they were, and what Rick was, and what they could and could not be together, and who chose to leave, because the alternative was letting Rick's influence reshape her into something she did not want to be. And Rick, alone in the empty community he had made his playground, tries to harm himself. The show shows this quickly and then moves to the next scene. But it shows it. Rick, who treats vulnerability as a disease, who has built elaborate systems for avoiding every kind of genuine feeling, sits alone after Unity is gone and cannot manage the loss the way he usually manages things. The mechanism does not work. The flask is there, but it is not enough. The joke he would normally make is not available to him. The fan theory that lives inside this episode asks what it would look like if Rick had chosen differently, if he had stayed with Unity rather than leaving, if he had chosen to let the relationship be what it was trying to be rather than maintaining the distance that protected both of them from what being fully close would require. The answer the theory proposes is that Rick staying with Unity would have meant choosing a specific kind of power. Unity is vast. Being with Unity means access to an essentially unlimited form of connection and resource and presence. It means never being alone in any real sense, because Unity is everywhere she is assimilated. It means being cared for by something that contains multitudes. It is the version of relationship that is technically perfect for someone like Rick, who needs connection but cannot afford the vulnerability of ordinary connection, because Unity is too large and too distributed to be destroyed in the way that individual people can be destroyed. And Rick left anyway, because he knew he was bad for her, and because choosing the vast, safe, structurally invulnerable form of connection over the particular, specific, mortal form of connection would have been choosing something other than what he actually wants, which is, at the bottom of everything, exactly the kind of love that can be lost. Rick Sanchez keeps choosing the kind of love that can be lost. Despite everything. Despite knowing what loss costs. Despite having a multiverse of alternatives. He keeps choosing the version of connection that is vulnerable, that is specific, that is attached to people who can be taken from him by a bomb, or by time, or by the slow accumulation of damage that his presence causes in the people around him. That is not philosophy. That is grief making a decision every day about whether to keep going anyway. And the answer, for Rick, is always yes. There is one more thing worth saying before we close, and it is not a theory, it is just an observation about what it means to love a show this way. Rick and Morty rewards exactly the kind of attention we have been paying it tonight. It was built by people who hid things in it, who planted seeds they knew would not be understood for seasons, who wrote lines that functioned as jokes in the moment and as confessions in retrospect. It trusts its audience in a way that not many shows trust their audience, which is to say it trusts you to be paying close enough attention that the hidden things matter, that the details are worth finding, that the experience of understanding something slowly, across multiple viewings, is itself part of what the show is offering. The theories we have explored tonight are not separate from the show. They are part of what the show becomes when you give it enough time and enough attention. They are what Rick and Morty grows into when you watch it the way it wants to be watched. There is probably a dimension out there, in the real infinite multiverse beyond whatever Central Finite Curve might or might not be managing our access to the rest of existence, where Rick and Morty has already been fully explained, where every theory has been confirmed or denied, where the full arc of what Dan Harmon and his writers built across however many seasons the show ultimately runs is visible in its entirety, and the whole shape of it is clear. We do not live in that dimension. We live in the one where it is still unfolding, where the next episode might change everything, where the theories are still theories, beautiful and uncertain and open to being overturned. That is actually the better dimension to be in. Thank you for spending this time here. Drop a comment. Tell me what you are thinking. Tell me which theory you are taking to bed with you tonight. And if you are new here, subscribe before you go. There is more where this came from. Good night. Bonus section, the drunk Rick theory, and why the flask has always been a red herring. One of the most compelling and least dramatic theories in the entire Rick and Morty fandom is this one. Rick is not actually an alcoholic. He wants everyone to think he is, and the distinction, while it might initially seem minor, has genuinely significant implications for how we understand every moment of vulnerability Rick has ever shown, and every moment he has deflected. The theory begins with a simple observation. Rick's drinking does not appear to impair him. At all. Ever. He performs extraordinarily complex scientific procedures while visibly intoxicated. He navigates life-threatening situations, makes real-time tactical decisions in environments that would challenge sober geniuses, and executes plans with a precision that would not be available to an actual alcoholic operating at the blood alcohol content his behavior implies. Rick burps and slurs and carries the flask constantly, and presents every outward sign of being a person who drinks too much and too consistently. And then he does the impossible with perfect accuracy while apparently doing it. The theory argues that Rick maintains the performance of alcoholism deliberately as a component of the persona he has constructed for public consumption. Because a drunk genius is, in the social landscape Rick operates in, significantly less threatening than a fully lucid genius. A drunk genius's behavior can be explained. His rudeness, his unpredictability, his emotional unavailability, his occasional flashes of genuine warmth that he immediately covers up with something coarse or dismissive. All of it, in the frame of alcoholism, becomes legible as the behavior of someone who is sad and damaged in a specific and comprehensible way. A sober Rick who is this rude and this unpredictable and this emotionally unavailable is something else. A sober Rick who chooses to be exactly this way, who has full access to his own cognition and still makes all these choices, is much harder to be comfortable around. He is much harder to dismiss. His behavior cannot be attributed to the flask. It has to be attributed to him. The flask is, in this reading, Rick's most sophisticated piece of social engineering. It gives everyone around him a framework for understanding why he is the way he is that is sympathetic and explanatory, and allows people to relate to him without having to fully confront what he actually is. People who drink to manage pain are understandable. People who are simply, voluntarily, completely this way are considerably more unsettling. There is evidence for this reading beyond the functional invulnerability of his intoxication. There are moments in the show where Rick's supposed drunkenness appears to drop at precisely the moments when Rick needs to be most effective and return at precisely the moments when maximum conspicuousness would be useful. There are scenes where Rick uses the flask as a prop in the theatrical sense, holding it in a way that emphasizes its presence without necessarily drinking from it, deploying the visual shorthand of the drunk grandfather to deflect attention from what he is actually doing. The deeper implication of this theory connects back to the work we did in Section 1. If Rick is not actually an alcoholic but is performing alcoholism, then one of the primary explanations available for his emotional unavailability, his self-destruction, his difficulty with relationships, his apparent inability to function in the sober daylight of genuine human connection, is not actually operative. It is a story he tells, a story others tell about him, that has become part of the official narrative of Rick Sanchez to the point where questioning it feels almost disloyal. But the official narrative of Rick Sanchez has always been exactly what Rick wants it to be. He controls his image. He controls how much of himself is visible. He has constructed a persona, drunk and brilliant and contemptuous and occasionally accidentally loving, that functions as insulation against anyone getting close enough to see what is underneath it, clearly enough to do anything about it. The flask is part of the insulation. It always has been. Whether this makes Rick more or less sympathetic is a question the theory leaves open. On one reading, a Rick who is not actually an alcoholic but performs alcoholism as a social management strategy is more in control of his presentation than the show implies, which suggests a level of deliberate self-construction that is either admirable or disturbing, depending on how you feel about the manipulation involved. On another reading, a Rick who has found it necessary to perform a specific kind of damage in order to be tolerable to the people around him is more isolated than the alcoholism frame suggests, because the isolation is maintained through a choice rather than through the chemistry of addiction, which means he is choosing it every day, which means the escape routes are available and he is not taking them. Both readings are uncomfortable. That is, characteristically, exactly where the best Rick and Morty theories tend to live. Final thoughts. What loving this show actually costs and what it gives back. There is a specific thing that happens when you invest this kind of attention in a piece of storytelling. You start to develop a relationship with it that is not entirely about the story being told. The theories become the point. The analysis becomes the connection. The act of paying attention this carefully, of finding the hidden things and understanding what they mean, becomes its own experience with its own rewards. Rick and Morty understands this about its audience. It was built by people who knew that certain viewers would not be satisfied with the surface of it. Who knew that for some people the adventures would not be enough, the jokes would not be enough, the emotional moments would not be enough, that what some people need from a piece of art is to feel like it trusts them, like it put things in there specifically for people who would look. The theories we have explored tonight are not conclusions. They are conversations that have been ongoing since the show began. Conversations between people who care about it deeply enough to disagree with each other about it in good faith, people who bring their real intelligence and their real investment to the question of what a piece of animated television about a drunk genius and his anxious grandson is actually saying underneath everything it is clearly saying. That is what the best fan communities do. They extend the art. They become part of what the art is, the way that a building becomes something different when people live in it than when it is just blueprints. Rick Sanchez would probably call all of this overthinking. He would probably say something cutting and then take a drink and change the subject. And then, if you left him alone long enough, he might quietly acknowledge that he had noticed the same things and had been thinking about them for longer than he was going to admit. That is the thing about Rick. He always already knows. He just needs someone to be in the room with him while he decides whether to say it out loud. Thanks for being in the room tonight. It means more than you know. Extended reflection, the Morty Night Run ticket and what it says about stories we tell ourselves. There is a reason the ticket theory has lived as long as it has in the fandom, and it is not just about the dimensional mechanics. It is about what the theory reveals when you think about it long enough. Which is this: we often do not notice when we have stopped following the original thing we thought we were following. We get comfortable with a shape, a pattern, a rhythm of how something works, and we stop checking whether the specific thing in front of us is still the specific thing we started with. We are following the Rick-shaped thing and the Morty-shaped thing and the family-shaped thing, and as long as those shapes are maintained, as long as the emotional continuity is intact, the dimensional accuracy of the source material feels secondary. This is, in a show explicitly about the multiplicity of identity and the radical contingency of any particular version of a person, a thesis statement. Rick and Morty has been arguing for years that the specific is less important than the experiential, that who you are is less a function of where you came from and more a function of what you do with where you are. The ticket theory makes this argument through the mechanics of its own setup. If you did not notice when the Rick changed, if the story continued to feel continuous and meaningful and worth caring about despite the dimensional swap, then perhaps the continuity you were tracking was never in the specific Rick. It was always in the story being told around and through and about whatever Rick-shaped thing happened to be occupying the role at any given moment. That is either deeply comforting or deeply unsettling, depending on how tightly you hold your concept of identity. For a show that has spent 9 seasons asking what identity even means in a universe of infinite duplicates, it is neither surprising nor, by this point, anything but precisely intended. The dimension-swapping logic also connects to what makes the show survivable in emotional terms. The show kills its characters constantly, not just background characters but central ones. Rick and Morty have died in multiple episodes. They have watched themselves die. They have buried themselves. They have moved into the lives of their own freshly dead alternates and continued. The show could not maintain any narrative stakes in the traditional sense if the audience held on too tightly to any specific version of any specific character. Part of what the show trains its audience to do, gently and persistently, is to understand that the version in front of us matters not because it is the one and only version, but because it is the one and only version right now. And right now is what we have. That is the closest thing Rick and Morty has to an affirmative philosophical position. Not nihilism, not meaninglessness, but a very specific argument about where meaning lives when it cannot live in permanence. It lives in the specific encounter, the specific moment of connection, the specific adventure, the specific conversation between this Rick and this Morty in this episode of their lives, which is real and complete and worth something even if there are infinite other Ricks and Mortis having completely different conversations in completely different dimensions right now. Right now is enough. Even if right now is inside a simulation, or inside the Central Finite Curve, or occupied by a replacement Jerry from a different dimension who thinks he is the original, the experience is still happening. The love is still real. The grief is still real. the story is still worth telling and worth watching and worth thinking about this carefully. That is the argument underneath everything. What the show keeps returning to, and why it matters that we keep returning to the show. There is a quality to Rick and Morty that becomes more visible the more time you spend with it, and it is this. The show is always making the same argument in different forms. It says it through Rick's backstory, and through Morty's arc, and through the Central Finite Curve, and through Evil Morty, and through the Beth clone situation, and through Unity, and through Mr. Poopy Butthole, and through the way Jerry keeps surviving. It says it so many times and in so many different registers and through so many different stories that you might not notice how consistent the underlying argument is until you have been watching for a while. The argument is, the things that feel like weaknesses are often the things holding the structure together. Rick's grief, which looks like damage, is the thing that has kept him moving and building and caring in spite of everything. Morty's anxiety, which looks like limitation, is the thing that keeps him human in a universe trying to make him otherwise. Beth's need for her father's approval, which looks like dysfunction, is the thing that holds the Smith family in the particular configuration that allows it to function. Jerry's insecurity, which looks like worthlessness, is the thing that makes him safe and functional and present in ways that a confident Jerry would not be. Mr. Poopy Butt is the thing that keeps a corner of the show's universe from collapsing entirely into the nihilism that Rick's worldview would otherwise win by default. The qualities that everyone, inside the show and sometimes outside it, identifies as the character's problems are also the character's load-bearing walls. Remove any one of them and you do not get a better version of the character. You get a different story that cannot carry the same weight. The fan theories we have explored tonight, all in their different ways, arrive at this same place. The simulation theory asks whether the ground Rick stands on is real, and then suggests that what he has built on it might be real anyway. The ticket theory asks whether the specific Rick matters, and then suggests that what the Rick-shaped thing has done might matter anyway. The Beth clone theory asks which Beth is original, and then suggests that by now the question is less important than what both of them have become. The Diane theory asks why Rick keeps moving, and finds the answer in a grief so specific and so complete that it became an engine. Everything this show does is in service of the same observation. The things you carry that feel like burdens are also the things that make you capable of carrying anything at all. Rick Sanchez is the smartest being in a curated section of the multiverse, and he is also the saddest, and these two facts are not in tension with each other. They are, as the show has been arguing from its earliest episodes, the same fact expressed in two different directions. Understanding that about Rick does not fix him. Nothing about having accurate analysis of your own condition automatically repairs the condition. Rick knows all of this. He has probably always known it. And he wakes up every morning, reaches for the flask, opens the portal, and goes anyway. That is, in the end, the only theory that matters. He keeps going, despite everything, in spite of everything. Because the alternative is standing still, and standing still means finally letting the grief be the last thing, and Rick Sanchez has always had one more thing to build. So does the show. So do we. Good night. Thank you for being here. A note on why these theories matter. There is one final thing worth saying before we close entirely, and it concerns the activity of theorizing itself, not the specific theories. When you build a fan theory about a piece of storytelling you love, you are doing something that looks like analysis but is also something more than that. You are extending the conversation the creators started. You are continuing, in your own head and in the forums and comment sections where you share your thinking, a kind of collaborative, imaginative work that would not exist without both the show and the people willing to take it seriously enough to look closely at it. Rick and Morty earns this more than most shows do, not because it is the most profound or the most beautifully made piece of television that exists, but because it was built with the explicit understanding that some viewers would look this carefully, and those viewers would find things worth finding. The details are there because the writers put them there for the people who would look. The open questions remain open because the writers want to know what you do with them. The ambiguity is not a failure. It is an invitation. The theories we have talked about tonight are not the only ones worth exploring. They are a sampling, chosen because they are well supported and because they connect to each other in ways that illuminate something about what the show is doing as a whole. The fandom has produced hundreds more, some of them brilliant, some of them the kind of beautiful wrong that is almost as satisfying as being right, all of them evidence of an audience that cares enough about the work to meet it halfway. That is the bargain the show makes with its audience. It offers something real and complicated and layered, and in return, it asks you to bring your real attention to it. Not just your passive enjoyment, though passive enjoyment is also valid, but your real, engaged, detail-noticing, thread-pulling attention. If you have stayed through all of this tonight, you have honored your end of the bargain. Go sleep, dream about portals, and when you wake up, maybe watch the show again from the beginning with different eyes. You will see things you did not see before. That is, after all, the promise the show has been making since its very first episode. It always has more to show you. There is always more to show you. That is the quiet contract between a great show and the people who love it. And Rick and Morty has been honoring that contract since 2013, with no signs of stopping. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring. The next video is already being built, and it will find you when it is ready. Take care of yourselves. Keep looking closely at the things that matter to you. And remember that the space between what a story says and what it means is where the most interesting conversations happen. That is where we live, when we watch things like this, together. Good night.